room starting at 11 o'clock. And I wanted to attend that too, Mr. Chairman, and I won't get a chance to hear local government in the Attorney General's office, but I would like to hear their response to the claim that's being made here today.
Senator Carroll, I have a question for you, if you'll just help me with my history. Were you governor when this bill passed, House Bill 44?
I was governor from 1975 to December of 1979, and I believe that would include that period of time.
Would you include this as being your bill? Was it part of your legislative agenda?
Well, quite candidly, no. The history
if you could
of this,
give, I've heard a little bit about what happened. If you wouldn't mind illuminating those of us.
Well, I don't know how much time you've got. Mine's run out. I was supposed to be in the adjoining room 2 minutes ago, but we had a special session the General Assembly called by then the Lieutenant Governor, who was Thelma Stovall, while I was in Georgia. And I got back to town. We did end up having a session in the General Assembly, and I testified before the House for a period of almost 4 hours, and I testified before the Senate for a period of about 4 hours. And as a result of those two sessions, we had some changes made in the law and ended up with House Bill 44. We also had a repeal, if my memory serves me correct. I think this memory is correct. You realize how many years it's been. And I'm dealing with an awful lot of matters these days that clogs my bucket of brains, which is I believe as good as it ever was, except it's got too much history in it that this committee sometimes gets tired of listening to. But I'm perfectly willing to going back and examining whether or not there's compliance with the limitation that we wanted to put on the growth of property. I want to avoid all of the issues of what governments should and should not be doing these days in terms of the massive increases in responsibilities that governments have taken on, particularly at the state level. If you permit me, just Mr. Chairman, to quickly say that one of my astonishments in coming back to the General Assembly in 2004 is that state government has basically now taken over the responsibility of funding the requirements of local governments. And so we're carrying that, and it's making it, we're limiting local governments in what they can and cannot do, whether they can raise revenue or not raise revenue, and local governments are all in a difficult position of carrying out their responsibilities to their local citizens. But in all instances, I want to preserve the right of local citizens to determine what kind of government they want and whether or not they want to pay for it. Because that's, after all, what government is. It's a government that's the kind of government you want, and it's the kind of government you're willing to pay for. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'd appreciate, again, the opportunity to get into the response to this question, though, of whether or not our Department of Local Government is following the intent of the General Assembly. And we need the Attorney General to give us their opinion, but after all, we make policy. The Attorney General does not. And local government... Not
supposed to.
Yes, well... if the Attorney General is interpreting something that's not in compliance with the intent of the General Assembly, we can straighten that out, and I'm perfectly willing to do so. I thank you very much for bringing this to light today, and again, the only problem I have with your calculation is you've assumed that the new revenue created in the new year allows you to raise revenue from the former year because it's more, and I don't believe that's the law. The revenue that we're limited of the compensated rate is the revenue from the prior year, not the revenue that the new rates produced in the new year. Thank you very much.
Senator Carroll, over here, you'd said that that you were in Georgia at the time that special session was called, and since I didn't have the privilege to be a fly on the wall, could you enlighten us as to what kind of conversation you had with your lieutenant governor once you did get back?
I think in fairness to Senator Carroll, we should note that in those years the lieutenant governor was elected separately.
And that is correct.
But it was a fellow Democrat, correct, Senator Carroll?
And I think maybe after what happened in the last governor's race, we still should have done it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cindy, it's good seeing you as always. Rick, welcome to Frankfurt. I was just curious. We have two conflicting Attorney General opinions, pretty much. Am I correct on that?
Well, I viewed it that way. But I don't believe the Attorney General viewed them as being conflicting when I read their opinion.
Right.
Because I think their opinion expresses that the prior one was just to determine whether our personal property enjoys the protections of House Bill 44, and it doesn't, and they said that the prior opinions were limited to that, in essence, that aspect of it. However, I think the results of the way it is currently being calculated brings personal property right into House Bill 44 to the detriment of real property owners, and I don't think you can divorce the two personally. So I see it that way, but in fairness to the Attorney General's office, I think they would take issue with that.
I was just curious. I mean, obviously, I tend to. I've only heard your side of the argument, but I'm like the governor. I tend to concur that perhaps the Department of Local Government is not applying the facts as it should be done. Typically, in these instances where we have a difference of opinion relative to the interpretation of law, you could come back to the General Assembly in hopes that they would modify it, or you could ask the courts for a declaration of rights. And I was just curious, looked like that'd be the quickest and the most efficient and probably the best way of doing it, because the court could focus on the issue as opposed to having 138 eyes on it. You would have one judge focus on a very complex issue. Have you given thought to that?
That is under consideration, Representative Arnold. The hope was that this could be fixed in a manner that perhaps wouldn't, I know that my client is sensitive to refund issues and things like that might occur. She was looking to fix this in the most expeditious manner possible. And I think that that is being considered, but at this time we were hoping that we could, and today, quite frankly, even if we go there, today's been helpful in that as well. Something else that I would just like to point out that tails into your last question, and that is, I find it a little bit that prior to an Attorney General in 1980, Attorney General's opinion in 1980, where it basically expressed that real property rates could be different than personal property rates. I don't think when that occurred, anyone took into account, the unintended consequences that would bring under this definition of compensating tax rate. And I think had that been understood, it might have come out differently. So I don't know that really this is a result of, as much as the law as it is interpretations years after the law.
Okay.
Please proceed, Representative Simpson.
This comment. The way we work here, I mean, even though we can have a clear-cut answer to or address your concern, which seems very legitimate in many instances, things aren't passed that should be passed because of a multiplicity of considerations. And I'm not saying that the General Assembly would not act properly and efficiently on this, but I've seen our body disagree in reasonable